Good to hear that, and good morning. And thank you for your presentation. I suppose I just want to raise a number of issues. First of all, you talk about the disability allowance, and I know DFI produced figures roughly a year ago, which indicated that more applications were refused than were passed. The actual figures were 13,989 refused to 13,298 were granted. And of those appealed, about half were granted on appeal. And I'm finding this continually in my constituency office, that people are refused disability allowance or refused carers allowance, but are granted on appeal. But the process is so protracted. It's long, it's detailed, and it's very difficult. And I'm sure many autistic people who are applying for disability will find the whole experience overwhelming, and may not actually appeal if they're turned down initially, because not all of the people appeal. So I'm just wondering, is there something can be done to make the application forms and process more accessible, and to keep all disabled people in mind, but we're talking about autistic people here, to make it easier for them, because as they say, they have an invisible disability, so often they're the ones who are not granted the disability allowance initially. Also on the carers allowance, I'm just wondering if your department has done any work on costing abolishing the means test and instead making it a needs-based assessment. In relation to employment support, as our chairperson indicated there, 85% of autistic people are either under or unemployed, according to As I Am. And I know you have indicated some supports there, but they're obviously not working. And so is there more that can be done to support autistic people into getting employment? It may be an attitude from employers that needs to be worked on. It may be a lack of understanding or a lack of acceptance, or maybe a lack of support. But, a combination of all needs to be looked at. You also talked about the Indicon Cost of Disabilities report, and that's published over a year ago after much delay. Dr. Anya Ruddy was in here from ATU in Sligo quite recently, and she indicated that it costs a family with an autistic child $28,000 over and above what it would cost a family without an autistic child to support that child. That's including, I suppose, paying for therapies because they're not available through the CDNTs, and for care, and both paid and provided for in the home. So I'm just wondering again, what more can be done to address those? I know the supports that were given in the budget were welcome. All supports are welcome, but I think many of them have been overtaken by the cost of living. So I think we need to see more sustainable supports. And obviously, what would be better is that people would be able to take up employment and be able to support themselves in a better way and not be dependent on the state for handouts. And just one other thing, the structure of the disability payment, where people are allowed to work and earn a certain amount without losing their disability payment, or it's reduced afterwards. Many people do not look for or take up employment because of the fear of losing the secondary benefits, such as the medical card. So that's something that could be looked at. And I mean, I would hear a lot of the time from disabled artists and musicians who work on commission, and that's not taken into account as well. So that, that their pay is not a set amount per week. It can vary, and if it could be looked at on a yearly basis rather than on a weekly basis. Thank you, Chair.
In terms of the issue, your first question was really around appeals and processing. What we find is that I think about 82% or thereabouts of decisions that are made on disability allowance are made by the department's own officers. So in other words, if they're not made in the initial instance, they may be referred back for review, and the ultimate decision is made there. There are a couple of different factors, and we have tried to work with the various different groups. We certainly want to try and rationalise the forms wherever we can. Of course, when you've a means test and the added complexity of the medical conditionality, there's a limit to how far you can reduce down the application requirements. But we do try to keep the forms readable, to keep them short, and we have reduced the length, I know, of the carers allowance form considerably. One of the issues is that I think people, and it's been raised in other committees as well, that people will understandably try and apply for the payment as soon as possible, because if you're ultimately successful, that's the date to which your payment will be backdated. So obviously they want to make sure that they are eligible as soon as possible. But at times that can mean that people will not necessarily go to the trouble, or to be honest, the expense of preparing sort of specialist reports that might actually help their application. And it's only when it then goes to appeal that they then try and bolster their paperwork, and that can help their application. So we're looking at what we can do on that to try and improve it, but the intention is always to try and make it easy for the customer and to make sure that people get their entitlements. We're not certainly not trying to frustrate people. In terms of the means test, you asked about the costing of the abolition of the means test. The numbers, I know figures have been provided by the carers organisations effectively saying, well, if you look at everyone who gets the care support grant and then just subtract the number who already get carers allowance, the difference is your level of payment. I think we have looked at, overall high-level costings for reducing the means test, but effectively, if you remove the means test, you're providing a universal payment, and it's no longer. There are non-means tested options, the carers benefit, and obviously domiciliary care allowance is not means tested. But in terms of costing, it's something that we are looking at. But it's difficult. It's always difficult to cost when there's a large cohort you're not already supplying. You don't know what you don't know, in a sense. You don't know what their means situation would be. You don't know to what extent they're excluded from the means test, and you don't know to what extent they will meet medical conditionality if they're not already within your customer base. So it is tricky to give an accurate costing there. I'll perhaps come back to Geraldine in a moment on employment supports, and I'll just maybe whistle through the ones on my side. On the cost of disability report, which was published in December 2021. It did take some time to do, but just to be assured that part of the reason why it took so long to do is we wanted to make sure that we had a very inclusive consultation process. So we took on board feedback from stakeholder groups about the time that will be needed and about the questions that were on it, the length of the form, because it's quite detailed, the original survey, and I think it's possibly, if not the largest, the second largest survey that's ever been done of disabled people in this country. So while it did take a bit longer, I think that enriched the analysis having that perspective. The report took a top-down and bottom-up approach. In other words, it did a kind of econometric analysis, just looking at coming up with a costing, and then it asked people. And actually the two different methods more or less aligned in terms of the ranges that came out. And what the report said is undoubtedly there's a range of costs, and it does depend on your condition. Of course, some people have multiple conditions, which complicates matters, but that there's a mix of responses needed. Some of it's income supports, some of it's grants, some of it's services, and also employment is a big factor, which I think you touched on in one of your other questions. So, as I say, the Minister of State, Anne Rabbitte, was chairing the group, which is coordinating and looking across government at the responses. From our point of view, there are two main things I would point to. I outlined in my opening statement the budget matters that were done to address cost of living and cost of disability. There were previous matters in previous budgets. And also we're looking at the straw man proposal. And what the straw man proposal is essentially looking at is, how do we structure our disability payments so that we have the level of payment better reflects the condition of the person, and also how do we do it in a way that better connects people to employment insofar as they're able. So we're working on that. We've done a lot of work on it, and we're hoping Q1, if we can, to get it through. But it's important that we get it right, and then we'll have a consultation process, as we always do, where we want to engage with the various stakeholders. You asked about secondary benefits. I take your point on the secondary benefits. It is an issue. When we look at say for example, even the disregards. I've been at stakeholder forums where I've heard people say you can't work more than €140 or you lose your DA. Now, that's not actually how it works, but I understand the perception that's there. And what we see is that the disregard has now moved up to €165. But what we've tended to see is that people, even though you can continue earning up to €375 before you fully lose your payment, that people tend to get to that disregard level and stop. Which is not how disregards are really meant to work. They're supposed to help you smooth the journey back to combining employment income with social welfare income. So there is, I think, an anxiety that, aside from how it might affect your payment, that your payment is also your sort of passport to other things, whether it's a medical card, whether it's free travel, etc. Now, I know that I think it was 2018, 2019, the means test for the medical card, which is not under our department's control, was changed, and there were some changes to try and get over that. And we also have fast track, where you get back onto the payment very quickly if it doesn't work out for you. So in other words, you don't have to go all the way back to the start in terms of applying. So we do try and make it easy. It's not an easy one to crack. We've had discussions with a lot of other jurisdictions. There was a very big summit up in Belfast last year, the Harkin Summit, where we dealt with people around the world, and a lot of countries are struggling with this, I think. You asked about disabled artists. Yeah, well, the way we work it, and this issue's come up, and we've good engagement with the arts community, both on the basic income proposal, which was Department of Culture, but also how we do the means test. And the way it works is that if you get an Arts Council grant for a project that's supposed to last X period of time, what we typically do in disability allowance is that we will spread that money over that period. So in other words, if you get €1,000 to do a 10-week course, we'll split €100 over the 10 weeks. That's generally the way it works. And by the way, we net off expenses. So in other words, any materials, other workplace essentials, they will be netted off. There has been a bit of calls for clarity around that. So we've tried to put more information out there, and we are dealing with the Arts Council on that. Now, you did ask about employment support, so I might just ask if Geraldine has anything to add to what I've already said.
Okay. Thanks, Deputy. I will just deal with your query in relation to employment supports and what has been done at the moment. I suppose I'd point out to the Government's Employment Services Strategy, which is Pathways to Work, which has a particular strand there in relation to leaving no one behind, which is extending and looking at supports to persons facing particular difficulties in the labour market and are facing the barriers and required supports that was referred to in a more general level. So obviously that includes persons with disabilities there. So the early engagements initiatives was one of the key commitments there, which we commenced in July of this year. We started working with young people who were in receipt of DA. And what we did there is we wrote out to around 6,000 people with a letter which was developed in consultation with a number of community and voluntary organisations who are working with persons with disability. So it was a specially designed letter in that way, saying that we would be in contact with them by phone in a follow-up phone call to see what kind of employment supports that we could offer them, that Intrio could offer them at this particular point in time as well. Generally, the feedback was positive. Some obviously weren't interested at this point in time because maybe they were in education, but at least it brought to their attention that the services are available to them when they would need them, maybe when they're finished their college course or whatever as well. So of the say 6,000 that we wrote out to, we've made phone calls to 5,800. Around 3,300 answered the call, and now that has led to a number of people who are being referred to other services, be it employability, be it some of the schemes we've mentioned, or are engaging with our intro services as well. That's around just under 1,000 who are currently engaging with our services and that. So I suppose that's an example where we proactively went out to see what supports are available to persons on disability allowance at a young age, to let them know that we are available there to help them find employment and support them in employment, and to get information on the schemes that are available to them as well. And I suppose that's the specific schemes that are there to support persons with disability, but also the general schemes, because we do keep an eye on the take-up of those schemes as well on persons who may be on job seekers, but who self-declare as having a particular barrier in entering the workforce arising from a disability as well. We're going to extend that initiative to look at the next age group from March onwards as well. And we're obviously looking to, improve that refine that as we progress as well with it over the next while as well, and to look at the outcomes and the results in relation to that as well, and get feedback as well, obviously, from the groups to see what we're doing and what we can do better. We then, of course, have a number of specific schemes that are there to support people who either come to us on a voluntary basis who are in receipt of disability allowance, or people who are on job seekers who self-declare having some form of disability that creates additional barriers or challenges for them finding employment or accessing training. The employability contracted services is one such scheme that we have. There's over 3,000 people on that caseload at the moment, and that provides tailored employment support advice for persons with disability, including periods of time when they were in employment, and a high proportion of people who are under that scheme would actually be getting the in-work supports, which I think is very important as well. We mentioned previously as well the WSS scheme, which I think is available to employers who recruit people who have a disability as well, and you know, there's around 1,500 participants on that programme as well, with an annual budget of 23 million. And we do then have people who are in our normal job activation caseloads who have self-identified either as that they have a disability, or who are on DA as well, and they obviously have, you know, the specific rules around people for accessing the various schemes, be it CE. Anybody in DA, you don't have to have the normal waiting periods there. You can go on CE. We've extended eligibility for Jobs Plus, which is another employment recruitment incentive for employers to persons on DA, and equally TOOS as well, which is an employment support scheme as well that has been extended to persons on DA. So I suppose the main point I'm making is that there's a range of specific supports for persons with a disability, and as well as ensuring that they have access to the general supports that are there in terms of the services we provide, the general employment services, or the schemes that we have available to us as well.
We don't have any breakdown on how many of those people are autistic.
No, we don't. We don't have a breakdown of. You're right, Deputy. We don't have a breakdown of type of a disability across the scheme for employment services. It's really when people come in to us, either, as I say, either they're on the DA or they may be a job seeker, that it's at that stage the services we provide are tailored to them, and it's what they kind of self-declare at that time. But you're right to say we don't have a breakdown of type of disability that we would have at that point.